you were in City Hall a year ago when we last met, and I think most of us would agree that the past year has been a difficult one. We continue to struggle as far as job creation in the United States. We continue to have this intractable deficit and debt problem at the national level, while the events of this past Friday in Afghanistan remind us that we also are a country at war. Recently, the Pew Charitable Foundation also released a survey indicating that 53% of parents in the United States today now believe that their children are going to have a lower standard of living than they have. And today, only about 32% of Americans describe their economic situation as either good or excellent, less than a third of us. So clearly, we do need to attack the jobs problem as well as the debt issue, remaining cognizant of the fact that we are at war. The 4 gentlemen who was killed, the 5th who was grievously injured, are part of the Indiana National Guard. Some of you know I like to highlight the Indiana National Guard as an example of that sense of purpose and service that permeates all of our communities in Indiana. After last year's census, Indiana is now the 16th largest state in the country, but the Indiana National Guard unit is the 4th largest. Since the events of 2001, we've had over 17,000 members of the Indiana National Guard alone service overseas. Today, as we meet here in Lake Station, we have about 1,275 troops serving us overseas. In the end, I would point out, though, in this last year, there has been some good news. That is, compared to last year, we now have all of our troops withdrawn from the country of Iraq. As someone who voted against the invasion of that country, I am very pleased with that development. The same obviously cannot be said for Afghanistan. Under the President's surge policy, you saw troop levels increase this summer to about 100,000 in Afghanistan. Today, as we meet here in January, the levels are about 98,000. The President has also indicated that you're going to see some withdrawal during the summer of this year, approximately 23,000 troops, but has also indicated he believes we'll have troops in Afghanistan until 2014. Representing our interests in Washington would suggest to you that I disagree with the President's policy and do think it is time to bring our troops home from Afghanistan as well. The deaths Friday obviously highlight the ultimate cost of these conflicts. And those who have been injured, those who have literally sacrificed their time and their talents and efforts on our behalf. But Joe Stiglitz, a local product who's a Nobel laureate, has indicated there's an economic price as well. That these 2 conflicts are going to end up costing our nation somewhere between $5 to $7 trillion, every dollar of which is going to be a borrowed dollar. Which leads me to the issue of the debt and deficit. I must tell you, in the intervening year, I am very frustrated and disappointed that the institution of Congress, as well as the President, has not come to grips with this overarching problem. If you remember, in December of 2010, the President had a commission, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, that had recommendations of about $3.9 trillion worth of deficit reduction over 10 years. But they could not reach the necessary consensus to send their recommendation to Congress. Congress, for its part, did not simply independently take up those recommendations and have a vote, all for naught. We had controversy within the Congress this past summer. A select committee was created. They were to find about $1.5 trillion worth of deficit reduction this past November. As I think most people appreciate, they also failed. I would want you to know I have done my very best and would use as an example my position as the ranking Democrat on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee in the House. In conjunction with my chairman, Rodney Friedlandheisen, a Republican from New Jersey, and members of our subcommittee in a bipartisan fashion, we have tried to address this problem. Over the last 2 years, we have reduced funding for the Department of Energy and water projects in this country by $1.4 billion. We didn't do it in one fell swoop, and we were very meticulous about looking at each program under our jurisdiction. In some areas where we felt the program no longer had value, there was a carbon capture program for a coal-fired plant in West Virginia, we eliminated it. In that instance, we saved $187 million. In others, we decided we could get by with some reductions in spending. There were a reduction over 2 years of about $400 million in renewable programs. There's no question we need to do that type of research. What the mayor, the council, and the city are doing here at City Hall is an example of that. So we didn't want to address it mindlessly and found those accounts we thought really did need additional dollars and resources. One of those was for industrial technology and production. You think about our industry along the lake shore. We want to make sure they can be as efficient and use as little energy as possible. We increased funding for that account over last year by about $20 million. We have to continue to reduce our dependency on foreign oil. We need to get more miles per gallon for our cars. So we did increase research for vehicle technology to do that by about $19 million over last year's level. But in the end, did see a reduction of about $1.4 billion. But in the end, as I stand here today, would tell you as we head into the second session of this Congress, my priority remains the creation of jobs. When we met a year ago in Lake Station, the unemployment rate was about 9.4%. Today, it's 8.5%. That is better, but the fact is there's still 13.1 million Americans with no job at all, and obviously many more people who are underemployed in our society. Additionally, in December, you saw the creation of about 200,000 new jobs. That's very good news. But the fact is, the Brookings Institute has indicated that if we would create 208,000 jobs a month, every month, it would take us until 2024 to get back to where we were in 2007. So for the sake of those families who need those jobs, we have to address this issue. For the sake of the economic health of our country, we need to address this issue. But it also helps on the debt part. The Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan agency of the United States Congress that does the budget work, indicated if we were at full employment, which was still at about 5.2% unemployment, we would have about a third less deficit spending and could begin to attack the deficit. So it's clearly something we need to be done. My way of thinking where we ought to start is to rebuild our economic infrastructure. You have programs in place that are taking place under the mayor's administration as far as the sewers. You think about water treatment, think about roads and bridges, airports, our ports. The American Society of Civil Engineers indicated that in 2010 alone, they believe that our economy was about $130 billion smaller than it could have been, simply because of deteriorating infrastructure. They also believe that we need to spend over the course of the next some years about $2.2 trillion to repair and bring all of this back up to good working order. And I think you live in places like Lake Station and Lake County, nobody has to draw you a map. There's 4,091 bridges in Indiana alone that are deficient or obsolete. And when you think about the bridge at Martin Luther King Boulevard in Gary over the Borman Expressway, it's closed. If you've been on Indianapolis Boulevard in Hammond and driven over the Gibson rail yards, you realize you're on a 4-lane bridge that is now down to 2 lanes. And we all know what happened with Klein Avenue. So we ought to make the investment. The question would be very responsibly, okay, Pete, where are you going to get the money? I think the time has come for everybody to pay their fair share. I'm looking around this room, and people on Lake Station have paid and are paying their fair share of federal income tax. That's not the case with everybody. You have 30 major U.S. corporations between 2008 and 2010. Companies like General Electric, companies like Boeing, and Boeing gets almost half of their revenue from us as taxpayers because of all the defense work they do. They didn't pay a penny in federal corporate income tax. They made $160 billion of profit. I just don't think that's right. Another example that I would use is you have, as we meet here today, firefighters, you have police officers in Lake Station risking their lives for us, who are now paying a greater proportion of their income in federal taxes than 25 hedge fund managers did in 2008, who earned $22 billion. None of them were risking their lives for any of us, and I just don't think it's fair. We're all familiar with the tax cuts under President Bush's administration. Since 2001 through the end of this year, that will have reduced federal revenues by $2.7 trillion because every one of those dollars have been borrowed as well. And the question is, do we get anything for that lost revenue? The idea was it was going to put people to work. My sense is the economy was a lot better 10 years ago than it is today. And the fact that we have again borrowed all of those monies is something that we've got to take stock of. In the end, I think we need to take the same approach with the tax programs as we did on our Energy and Water Subcommittee, is look at each one. Because some of those provisions, I'm sure, really do have merit and we ought to retain. Some potentially we ought to change, and in some we ought to simply get rid of. But as we proceed with these questions in Washington, I would hope that the Congress takes a couple of pages out of the books of local officials here in Northwest Indiana. You think about some of the issues you've had with water management and flooding in places like Lake Station, Hobart. Well, people in Lake Station can blame Hobart, Hobart can blame Lake Station, they have. Except now, officials of both communities are working together as to how can we best deal with this situation so everybody's ahead of the game. You think about Lake and Porter County now being part of what is called a HIDTA, high-intensity drug trafficking area. I don't like the designation, but it allows the 2 counties to get about $3.1 million worth of federal monies to help the various police departments better coordinate their activities, to gather and share intelligence. Lake Station has actively been involved in this. And the fact is, the U.S. Attorney announced in November of this past year that by and large, because of the work of the HIDTA, federal officials in conjunction with local departments have now solved over 20 unresolved homicides from the past. So again, that type of cooperation can pay dividends. As we proceed, and I conclude my opening remarks, and I'll take the questions, would harken back to the survey indicating that we have 53% of all parents in this country thinking your children are going to be worse off. That's not the country my parents left me. That is not the country I'm going to leave to the next generation, and you don't either. You certainly need to know that I will continue to do my very best, work hard, and try to be proactive in Congress to address some of these problems.